"Translate this and my salary is yours," Richard Bennett declared, his voice soaked in smug amusement as he extended a thick contract toward Alicia Jameson like he was offering her a parlor trick instead of a legal document worth millions. The words fell hard into the heavy silence of the Caldwell Estate's grand dining room. Striking like a slap meant not just for Alicia, but for everyone watching. Polished executives, waitstaff frozen mid-service, a chandelier flickering slightly above polished mahogany. His challenge wasn't meant to be fair. It was meant to entertain. Laughter rippled around the table, sharp and elitist, as polished cufflinks and tailored suits leaned in, savoring the spectacle of a delivery woman in her yellow uniform shirt and frayed black backpack, holding a document none of them imagined she could even comprehend. The marble floor beneath her scuffed sneakers seemed almost to hum with the arrogance in the air, thick as cigar smoke, timeless in its cruelty. Alicia's gaze was steady, dark eyes meeting Richard's without flinching, her fingers tightening imperceptibly on the strap of her bag. She was used to the looks, the assumptions, the dismissive jokes thrown carelessly over polished tables by men who'd long forgotten that dignity was owed to all people, not just to those who dined in rooms like this one. But there was something about tonight. About the particular tilt of Richard's smile, the gleam of challenge behind his narrowed eyes, that made her pause. It was not a joke to him, it was a dare, a performance for his board, for his guests, for the ornate ghosts of old money watching from gilt-framed portraits on the walls. She stepped forward slowly, wiping her palms once along the thighs of her black work pants, the yellow fabric of her uniform shirt creasing at the elbows. Her voice, when it came, was low but edged with steel. "If I translate it before sunrise," she said evenly, holding Richard's gaze with quiet defiance, "will you give me a raise?" For the briefest of moments the room's laughter faltered, a beat of hesitation rippling among the polished guests like the sudden hush before a storm breaks. Richard's smirk deepened, his arrogance unshaken but his confidence flashing just briefly into uncertainty. "A raise?" he drawled, leaning back in his high-backed chair, swirling bourbon lazily in his glass. "No, Alicia. If you manage to translate that correctly, I'll double your salary." His words were soft, almost playful, but there was venom beneath the surface, a reminder that to him, this was a game he believed he couldn't lose. Then he tossed the heavy sheaf of papers onto the table with a practiced flourish, its pages fanning out like the opening move of a chess match he assumed he'd already won. "It's a binding contract," he added, "in Portuguese, full of legal and engineering terms. Google won't help you." Alicia took another step forward, reached for the document without breaking eye contact. Her hands, calloused from years of quiet labor, closed around the contract's edge with a steadiness that masked the storm rising in her chest. A mixture of humiliation and resolve, sharp and cold, like the winter wind outside the estate's thick windows. Around her, the board members chuckled again, though their laughter was thinner now, slightly uneasy. Diane Winters, the company's CFO, arched a brow from her seat, sipping her wine with quiet intrigue, her gaze lingering on Alicia just a moment longer than most. Alicia turned then, slowly, her sneakers silent on the marble, as she walked toward the servants' exit, the contract heavy in her hands but her heart heavier still. She felt every gaze on her back, felt the cold amusement mingled with disbelief, and yet carried with her a truth none of them knew, none of them even suspected. Because before life had driven her to this uniform, before the years had layered invisibility over brilliance, Alicia Jameson had been more than they could imagine. And tonight, they would learn. The worn linoleum floor of Alicia's small apartment seemed to creak in recognition as she slipped inside that evening, contract in hand, closing the door gently behind her as if to contain the memory of the laughter that had chased her from Caldwell Estate. She didn't bother turning on the main light. Instead, she let the dim glow from the street lamp outside fall across her battered coffee table and threadbare couch, a familiar landscape she had come to know intimately. She set the thick contract down carefully on the table's scratched surface, running her fingers along its embossed seal, her touch slow, deliberate, almost reverent. The seal wasn't what intimidated her. Portuguese wasn't foreign to her, not really. The language carried the echoes of another life, one long buried beneath years of obscurity and struggle. Above the couch, a faded photograph stared down at her. A younger Alicia, her hair neatly braided, a graduation robe draped over slender shoulders, her smile unguarded, bright, proud. To her right and left stood two professors from the University of Lisbon, their pride evident, their hands resting lightly on her shoulders. The diploma in her grasp then had not just represented a degree, it had been the culmination of years of scholarship, of countless nights spent unraveling the complexities of polyglot semantics and legal language. Dr. Alicia Jameson, that had been her name once. Spoken with respect at international conferences, printed beneath dense academic papers, echoed in lectures and consultations that spanned continents. Before Atlanta, before 2008, before her department's funding scandal, a scandal she had no part in, yet one that dragged her into its undertow, sweeping away her tenure offer, freezing her visa status, emptying her savings. She remembered standing before a judge in a cold Atlanta immigration courtroom, her file thick with publications, recommendations, credentials that no longer carried weight, overqualified, underprocessed, the clerk had muttered dispassionately. And with that, her future had quietly crumbled. Alicia hadn't stopped reading then. She hadn't stopped knowing. But she had stopped being seen. The cleaning jobs, the delivery shifts, the endless tasks that filled her days had not erased her mind. They had only hidden it beneath a uniform most people chose not to look beyond. And yet, as her eyes traced the familiar loops and flourishes of Portuguese legalese on the contract's cover page, something stirred. A recognition not only of language, but of purpose. Tonight, she would no longer be invisible. The apartment was quiet except for the soft hum of her old laptop as Alicia set it carefully on the kitchen counter, the very same counter where she had unpacked grocery deliveries for years, where she'd folded towels and stacked bills that never seemed to lessen. But tonight it wasn't a counter. It was her desk, her battleground, her place of return. She pulled the chair close, smoothed the document flat before her, and opened a slim, battered dictionary, Portuguese to English, the same one she'd used as a young scholar, its pages dog-eared, its cover softened from years of handling. She flipped it open to the inside cover, where her name was written in neat block letters, Alicia Jameson, Universidade de Lisboa. The years felt thinner now, like a membrane she could pass through if only she reached far enough. She reached into her bag and retrieved her phone, scrolling quickly through her contacts until she landed on one name. Sarah, a former colleague, a friend, who had stayed in touch despite distance and time. Without hesitation, Alicia dialed. Sarah's familiar voice answered almost immediately, warmth tucked into every word. Alicia? It's late, are you okay? I need your eyes on a contract, Alicia said quietly but firmly, her voice threaded with determination. Portuguese. Dense legal language. I need it done by sunrise. A brief pause followed, then Sarah's quiet laugh. You always did like impossible deadlines. Send it over. By midnight, Alicia was knee-deep in legal jargon, her notes filling a yellow notepad, cross-references marked meticulously, inconsistencies underlined in blue ink. Her eyes scanned every clause with surgical precision, especially the sections thick with engineering and data rights terminology. At 2 a.m. she uncovered the first troubling passage, a subsection buried deep in technical language that seemed harmless but, on closer reading, quietly transferred proprietary encryption keys to a foreign shell company. Her fingers, though stiff from hours of writing and typing, didn't waver. Her brow furrowed not in confusion but in recognition. These weren't simple oversights. This contract had been crafted to deceive, its traps hidden beneath the elegance of language. By 4 a.m., Alicia had mapped every risk, annotated every clause, and highlighted every vulnerability. Outside her small kitchen window, the Atlanta sky was beginning to soften, the deep midnight blue shifting toward dawn's first pale gray. She sat back briefly, the weight of exhaustion settling into her shoulders, her coffee long gone cold beside her, untouched. She glanced again at the photograph above the couch. The young woman in the picture had once believed that knowledge alone would be enough, that mastery of language, of nuance, of law could protect and elevate. That belief had been tested, broken even, but tonight it returned. Not naive, not untouched, but sharpened. Tempered by years of invisibility. Alicia Jameson was ready. The woman they mocked as a delivery worker would walk back into that marble dining room not as a servant, not as entertainment, but as the only person who truly understood what that contract meant. And soon they would understand, too. The morning air was crisp, biting even, as Alicia made her way back to the Caldwell estate, the weight of the manila envelope she carried resting heavily but securely in her arms. Her uniform was the same. Yellow delivery shirt tucked neatly, dark pants pressed, hair pulled back. But everything beneath the fabric felt different. The world hadn't changed, but she had. The estate was already awake, staff bustling discreetly through polished corridors, trays of espresso and fresh pastries balancing on linen-covered carts. A few nodded at Alicia absently as she passed, but their glances lingered a little longer than usual, as if sensing something had shifted. Tina, the young housekeeper, appeared at the kitchen doorway, yawning. "You look serious this morning," she said with a faint, teasing smile. Alicia returned the smallest of smiles. "Didn't sleep much." "Big board meeting upstairs," Tina added, her voice lowering. "All the suits are back in that dining room, just like last night." "Perfect." As Alicia climbed the wide staircase and approached the double doors of the formal dining room, she heard them. The same low murmur of voices, the clink of glassware, the undercurrent of authority unchallenged. Richard Bennett stood at the head of the long, polished table, sleeves rolled up, espresso in hand, leaning casually against the chair, as if this morning was like any other. Until he saw her. His eyes narrowed slightly, the faintest hesitation crossing his face as Alicia pushed the doors open without invitation, stepping into their space, her posture calm and composed, the envelope held close to her chest. "You really going through with this?" he asked, voice laced with amusement, but shaded now with curiosity, perhaps even a whisper of unease. Alicia walked straight to him, set the envelope gently on the gleaming wood in front of him, and met his gaze. "I said I'd do my best," she replied simply. "I did." He picked up the envelope lazily, almost dismissively, expecting nothing of substance. Until he opened it. The air in the room seemed to change as Richard's eyes moved across the pages. Tight, clean handwriting filling the margins, annotations in 2 languages, cross-references carefully flagged, inconsistencies exposed with surgical precision. It was not machine-generated nonsense, it was expertise, deliberate and devastating. Diane Winters leaned in from her seat, her expression sharpening as she skimmed a few lines. "Where did she get this phrasing?" she murmured. "These terms, they're correct, spot on." The laughter that had once filled this room was gone now, replaced by a deepening silence that wrapped around every executive present. Alicia took a steady breath. Section 14.3, she began calmly, her voice cutting through the stillness, permits full encryption key transfer upon the second renewal of the partnership, without notification. That means you're handing over your entire infrastructure, Richard, your architecture, your intellectual property. A former attorney on the board flipped frantically through the annotated pages, eyes widening in alarm. "She's right," he muttered, disbelief dripping from every word. "We didn't catch this, none of us did." Richard's hand, still holding the document, lowered slowly to the table. His smirk had vanished completely, his gaze locked on Alicia now, no longer with condescension, but with dawning recognition, a realization sharp as broken glass. "Where did you learn this?" he demanded, the arrogance stripped from his voice. Alicia met his question evenly. "No one helped me," she replied. "This translation, this work, it's mine." Silence hung, dense and electric. "You could have kept quiet," Richard finally said, almost a whisper. "I could have," Alicia agreed softly. "But then, what would that make me?" Without waiting for an answer, she turned and walked out, leaving the stunned board members in her wake, their eyes fixed not on Richard now, but on the black delivery woman they had mocked just hours before, who had walked in and quietly dismantled them all. The estate halls were quieter that afternoon, their usual hum muted as whispers spread faster than footsteps. Alicia returned through the service entrance as always, the worn strap of her delivery bag slung across one shoulder. But this time the glances she received carried something different. Curiosity, uncertainty, and beneath that something approaching respect. In the kitchen, Tina paused mid-sentence as Alicia walked in, her eyes wide. "What just happened up there?" she asked softly. Alicia offered only a small smile. "I reminded them I exist." Wordlessly, she poured herself a cup of coffee and waited. It didn't take long. Within minutes, a house manager appeared, clearing his throat nervously. "Mr. Bennett would like to see you in his office," he announced, not quite meeting Alicia's eyes. Alicia rose without a word, smoothed her uniform shirt with deliberate calm, and followed the man down the corridor. Each step felt heavier but also lighter, as if with every stride she was shedding the invisibility they'd cloaked her in for years. Richard Bennett's private study was a world apart from the grand dining room. Dark wood shelves lined the walls, heavy with leather-bound books he may or may not have read, a single decanter of bourbon gleaming amber in the muted afternoon light. Richard stood near the window, hands in his pockets, posture more rigid than casual this time. His suit jacket was gone, his sleeves rolled, and his expression unreadable as he turned to face her. "You surprised me today," he began, his voice lower than usual, devoid of its usual veneer of amusement. Alicia met his gaze, her stance calm, composed. "You underestimated me," she replied simply. A small, humorless smile flickered at the corner of his mouth. "That's not a mistake I often make." "It's a mistake people like you make more than you realize," Alicia said, her tone mild but precise. "And it often costs more than you expect." He exhaled slowly, nodding as if acknowledging a truth he couldn't deny. "I want to offer you something," he said carefully. "Not charity. An opportunity." Her brow arched slightly, but she stayed silent, waiting. "I want you to review international contracts for us going forward," Richard continued, his words measured, deliberate, quietly, of course. "As a consultant, I can pay you significantly more than what you make delivering packages." "And what would I be called?" Alicia asked, voice cool. "A contractor," he replied. "Language and compliance. No official title. For now." Her eyes narrowed. "Because acknowledging me would be inconvenient?" Because right now, Richard admitted, his honesty surprising even himself. Too many people still see you as a delivery worker. If they realize you're smarter than our lawyers, there will be backlash. That's not fair, he added quickly. It's not untrue, Alicia said evenly. He paused, then looked at her directly. Would you consider it? You'd have autonomy, discretion. You'd be valuable. Alicia took a breath, feeling the weight of his offer and all it implied. The recognition, the responsibility, and the quiet conditions he wasn't saying aloud. I will consider it, she said carefully. But only if it comes with respect. Richard nodded once, the gesture small but significant. You'll have it. Alicia stepped back toward the door but paused, turning one last time. One more thing, she added. If I find anything unethical in any contract you send me, I walk, no matter what you're paying. His answer came without hesitation this time. Understood. Alicia inclined her head slightly, then left the study, leaving Richard Bennett standing alone amid shelves of books that suddenly seemed emptier than before. For the first time in his career, he felt a new kind of unease. Not because he'd hired someone dangerous, but because he'd finally recognized the quiet power of someone he'd long ignored. The following weeks unfolded with a quiet but undeniable shift. Alicia no longer entered through the kitchen with a delivery manifest tucked under her arm. She carried a slim laptop now, a leather-bound notebook, and a name on everyone's lips, even if most couldn't yet say it without a trace of discomfort. Her new title wasn't official, not yet, but function had already outpaced form. Richard had kept his word. Every international contract, every translation question, every delicate linguistic nuance found its way to Alicia's desk, or rather to a spare office tucked behind the estate's old library. A room that had once smelled faintly of dust and disuse, now humming with the energy of her work. Her reputation spread quickly among those who understood what she was catching. Quiet disasters buried in phrasing, clauses with jurisdictional traps, terminology that looked harmless until it didn't. And yet, even as her value became undeniable, resistance grew just as quickly, though rarely in ways that could be named aloud. It came in missed calendar invites, emails where she was conspicuously left off the CC line, documents forgotten in draft folders, subtle delays from middle management who felt threatened but didn't dare challenge her openly. The language of exclusion wasn't spoken, it was written in silence. Alicia noticed it all, but didn't flinch. She documented every oversight meticulously, filed every correction without ego, allowed her work to speak in the spaces where voices might falter. Tina, who continued to clean the corridors and tend to the linen carts, caught her in passing one morning. "You're trending in their Slack channel," she whispered with a wry smile, handing Alicia a neatly folded towel. "I didn't know we had a Slack channel," Alicia replied mildly. "They made one after that morning in the dining room," Tina said, voice lowered conspiratorially. "There's a thread titled, 'Reputational Risk.'" "You're the topic!" Alicia folded the towel slowly, carefully. "Of course I am." Upstairs, she encountered Richard in the hallway outside the boardroom. He looked tired, not from indulgence this time, but from restlessness. His eyes lingered on her for a long moment before he spoke. "You've become complicated," he admitted quietly. "No more complicated than your contracts," Alicia replied. For a moment, his mask slipped entirely. He looked at her not as an employee, not even as a contractor, but as an equal, a woman who had seen through him, through the system he managed, and who had proven indispensable despite every effort, conscious or unconscious, to keep her invisible. "How did I not know who you were?" he asked at last. Alicia folded her hands calmly. "Because you never asked," she said. "You never looked." He nodded slowly, almost ruefully. "You're right," he conceded. But though the words came easily, Alicia understood something deeper. Knowing was one thing. Changing would be another. And this house, this company, still harbored rooms where the old ways clung tightly, afraid of what she represented. She was no longer just the help, and that terrified them. It was late on a Friday when Alicia found it, the piece of the puzzle that shifted the ground beneath her careful work. The South African contract had arrived earlier that week, presented by the procurement team with an unusual urgency, touted as routine, already translated into English, no further review needed. Alicia's instincts whispered otherwise. The language was too clean, too polished, as if scrubbed of all nuance. The clause on digital rights storage caught her attention first, a subtle phrase, rendered innocuously as internal replication. But she recognized the original term from years of study. In the South African legal context, it implied open third-party handoff. The difference wasn't minor, it was catastrophic. If implemented in Europe, the clause would violate GDPR standards, expose Caldwell Technologies to lawsuits, and potentially hand proprietary data to competitors. She documented the discrepancy meticulously, annotated every line, and submitted her findings to the legal department, only to receive a curt reply from Mark Everett himself. "Appreciate your insight," his email read, "but we've already signed off." It was more than dismissal, it was obstruction. Alicia didn't hesitate. She called Helen Roberts, the CFO, directly. "Do you have a minute?" she asked, her voice calm, steady. "For you," Helen replied. "Always." In Helen's office, Alicia laid out the evidence. Helen reviewed it silently, her fingers drumming against the armrest of her chair. "They're trying to move around you," Helen said at last, her voice tight. "I noticed," Alicia replied evenly. "This is retaliation." Helen's gaze sharpened. "You've outmaneuvered them. They won't let that go quietly." Alicia met her eyes without blinking. "Then we escalate." Within hours, Richard had convened an emergency compliance session. The heads of legal, procurement, and risk management filed into the boardroom guarded and wary. Alicia sat at the end of the long mahogany table, silent but prepared. Richard opened the meeting bluntly. "We've had another miss." Alicia flagged it. It was almost signed. Mark Everett shifted in his seat. "With respect," he said smoothly, "Alicia is new to this decision chain. It's unrealistic to slow down approvals for retranslation every time." Alicia leaned forward, her tone precise but quiet. "It's unrealistic to expect we survive without it. If that clause was enforced in Europe, we'd face sanctions, lawsuits, and regulatory scrutiny. You would be testifying before the SEC, Mark." Mark's jaw tightened. "We can't vet every language like this." "Then build a team that can," Alicia said, her gaze steady. "You have the budget. Use it." Silence fell over the room. Helen was the first to speak. "She's right. We've been pushing risk downstream for too long." Richard didn't argue. "Every translation passes through Alicia's desk," he declared, effective immediately. Mark looked around the room, realizing that for the first time in his long career, he had lost control of the narrative. His silence was telling. After the meeting, Helen turned to Alicia as they exited. "You handled that like a conductor," she said. "I've spent years listening to rooms like that," Alicia replied. "Now I finally get to answer them." That evening, as she returned home, Alicia sat at her small kitchen table, opened her leather-bound notebook, and began to write. Her chapter wasn't about victory, it was about precision, about holding a line that no one else had bothered to hold until now. She wrote because she knew the resistance wasn't over. But neither was she. By Monday morning, the air inside Caldwell Technologies felt different. The usual hum of executives and assistants moving briskly through polished hallways was overlaid with a quieter tension, something unspoken but deeply felt. Mark Everett's nameplate had been removed from outside his office, his abrupt departure sending a ripple through staff who, for years, had deferred to his authority without question. Alicia Jameson walked through those same corridors with a calm grace, her badge clipped neatly to her blouse now, not as a delivery credential but as a marker of access. Authority earned not by title, but by the undeniable weight of her work. No one laughed as she passed. Some nodded, others lowered their eyes, uncertain but respectful. Her small office in the estate's old library had been transformed. A brass nameplate now sat on the desk. Alicia Jameson, Senior Executive Officer for Global Integrity. It was not lost on her that 3 months earlier she would have been invisible in this very space, moving unseen, unacknowledged, tasked with errands few valued and even fewer appreciated. But now they listened, perhaps reluctantly, perhaps awkwardly, but they listened. That afternoon, Richard Bennett summoned her to his private office once again. When she arrived, Helen Roberts was already seated, a legal folder resting on her lap. Richard's expression was somber but resolute. "Yesterday, during an executive lunch," he began, "someone asked what we should call you." Alicia's gaze didn't waver. "They're offering you a formal role," he continued. "A director-level position. Full compensation, resources, even an off-site office if you prefer." He hesitated. "But some are nervous," he admitted. "They argue you'll disrupt the chain of command, that you're overshadowing legal, that you've moved too fast." Alicia inhaled quietly. "Titles don't matter," she said at last. "Respect does." Helen leaned forward. "You have mine." Alicia nodded. "Then let's define the scope clearly. No more hidden roles, no more quiet workarounds. I'm here to protect this company, not patch its ego." Richard exhaled, visibly relieved. "Thank you. And one more thing," Alicia added. "We need to talk about the Verity program." Helen raised an eyebrow. "You ready?" Alicia smiled faintly. "I've been ready." Within days, the program took shape, a dedicated task force responsible for multilingual contract audits, cross-cultural training, and international partnership ethics. Alicia staffed it deliberately. Immigrant scholars driving rideshare cars, bilingual veterans working warehouse shifts, former academics sidelined by circumstance. People like her. People whose brilliance had been hidden, ignored, undervalued. Each new hire brought not just skill but story, and every story added strength to the structure she was building. Their first assignment revealed the truth Alicia had long suspected. Over 60% of Caldwell's international contracts contained language vulnerable to exploitation or arbitration traps. It wasn't negligence, it was cultural blindness. A belief that English was enough in a world far more complex. At the next board meeting, Alicia didn't sugarcoat it. "We've operated like a monolingual company in a multilingual world," she said evenly. "Ignorance is no longer an excuse." There was no laughter this time, only quiet nods of acknowledgement. And when Richard rose at the end of the presentation, he spoke words that months ago would have seemed unthinkable. "Ms. Jameson's framework," he said carefully, "will become our gold standard." That evening, as twilight gathered over Atlanta, Alicia sat at her desk back home. She retrieved the leather-bound journal given to her by Sarah, the friend who had first answered her late-night call when this journey began. She opened it to a fresh page and wrote a simple heading, Chapter 12, The New Room. And then deliberately she penned the first line. The most powerful rooms are not the ones filled with titles. They're the ones that remember who they once left outside, and invite them in not as guests, but as architects. Outside, a warm breeze rustled the thin curtains. Somewhere in the distance, a child laughed, and a train rumbled slowly through East Atlanta. Alicia smiled, a quiet, satisfied smile, and added 5 more words at the bottom of the page. Let the next one speak, because she knew the work wasn't over, and it was only just beginning.